Part 1. The Formation of a Mind. There are figures in history whose influence is quiet, almost invisible. They do not demand attention. They do not dominate headlines. Instead, they work in the background, shaping events, altering destinies, building empires. Charlie Munger was one of those figures, a man whose name the world often learned after learning the results of his decisions. Yet, without Charlie Munger, there may have never been a Berkshire Hathaway as we know it, no investment colossus, no Warren Buffett as the world's most admired investor, no legendary holding company spanning insurance, utilities, railroads, and multinational brands. Charlie was not the face of the empire, not the public hero. He was the architect behind the walls. To understand Munger is to understand discipline, clarity, rationality, and the price required to think differently from everyone else. This is not merely the story of wealth, it is the story of how a human mind is built, brick by brick, through hardship, curiosity, failure, and unwavering independence. And it begins in Omaha, Nebraska. Origins: the making of an independent mind. In 1924, Charles Thomas Munger was born into a family that valued education and civic responsibility. Omaha in those years was a place of modesty and pragmatism, a city where reputations were built slowly, where people worked without complaint, where the Midwest character of restraint and endurance was taught in every household. Charlie's father was a respected lawyer. His mother, a cultured and intellectual woman, encouraged books, precision, and conversation. Yet the family was not wealthy by the standards of old American aristocracy. The values taught were not luxury or entitlement, but responsibility, clarity, and restraint. By the age of 10, Charlie was reading constantly. He read science, mathematics, philosophy, history, anything that would explain how the world worked. The curiosity that would later define his worldview was already taking shape. His mind did not want opinions. It wanted models, structured patterns for understanding reality. This tendency toward rational order would become his most powerful tool. The shared soil with Warren Buffett. The irony is that at the same time, only a few miles away, another boy was being shaped by the same city. Warren Buffett, younger by 6 years, wandered through Omaha with newspapers to deliver, coins to count, and deals to imagine. The two boys never met during childhood, yet their lives moved in parallel like lines designed to converge only at a later critical point. Each one shaped differently by the same environment, the same understated culture of the American Midwest. Omaha did not create ambition the way New York did. It created discipline. And discipline is far rarer than ambition. This shared soil would matter later. Leaving Omaha. The first transformation. When Charlie turned 17, he enrolled at the University of Michigan to study mathematics. But history, as it often does, interrupted. World War II reshaped the lives of almost every young man in America. Charlie left college to join the U.S. Army Air Corps, where he trained not as a pilot, but as a meteorologist. Predicting weather for military operations required logic, precision, and the ability to make decisions with incomplete information, skills that would later translate almost perfectly into investing. War did not make Munger sentimental. He did not romanticize it. He saw reality as it was, harsh, indifferent, and demanding clear judgment. There was no room for fantasy, no room for emotional interpretation, only what worked and what didn't. This detached clarity became central to his life. Harvard Law without a degree. After the war, Charlie did something few have done before or since. He applied to Harvard Law School without holding an undergraduate degree. His recommendation was so strong, his capabilities so evident, that Harvard accepted him. There, his intellectual rigor sharpened. Law requires structured thought. It demands the ability to separate facts from emotion, to dissect arguments, to see multiple angles simultaneously. Munger excelled not simply because he was intelligent, but because he had developed what he would later call a latticework of mental models. He believed that one must gather ideas from multiple disciplines and use them together to understand the world more accurately than those who rely on one field alone. Where most minds used a single tool, Charlie assembled an entire toolbox. The lawyer who refused to think like a lawyer. Upon graduation, Munger moved to California and began practicing law. He was skilled, precise, and well compensated. But there was a problem. Charlie saw the limitations of selling his time. A lawyer, no matter how brilliant, is still tied to hours. A lawyer builds the wealth of others, not his own. He once observed, clearly and without bitterness, "You will not make real money renting out your time." This realization did not make him resentful of law. It simply made him strategic. He knew that the life he wanted, one of autonomy, independence, and intellectual freedom, would require a different path. So he began to study investing, real estate, and business structure. And in these fields, he found the same patterns he had always sought: systems, incentives, long-term cause and effect. He moved quietly, building partnerships, investing in real estate developments, and learning how capital compounds when guided by discipline and patience. While others sought quick profits, Charlie sought enduring value. He was not chasing wealth. He was constructing leverage. The first trials, personal tragedy. But success for Charlie did not come easily, nor was it without deep personal cost. During these years, Charlie's first marriage ended. In the divorce, he lost nearly everything. Financially, he had to begin again from almost zero. Then came the tragedy that would permanently reshape him. His young son, Teddy, fell ill with leukemia. Medical science at the time had few effective treatments. Charlie spent countless hours by his son's bed, watching life drift away. The loss was devastating. It could have broken him. It would have broken many. But Munger's mind processed the world differently. He refused to let grief distort his judgment or his purpose. He understood that pain is an inevitable cost of living, and that the only way to endure is to continue building, continue thinking, continue acting. This was not coldness. It was strength of an unusual kind. Strength forged not in denial of emotion, but in acceptance that emotion cannot be allowed to control the mind. Charlie later stated, without sentiment, "Life will have terrible blows and some misery. But if you can handle the bad hand well, it's the best you can do." This ability, to endure the worst without losing clarity, would define the rest of his life. The turning point: meeting Warren Buffett. It was 1959. Charlie Munger was 35, Warren Buffett was 29. The two met at a dinner arranged by mutual acquaintances. The conversation lasted hours. They spoke of business, rationality, investment strategy, and human psychology. They understood each other instantly. Buffett was then deeply influenced by the teachings of Benjamin Graham, the father of value investing, whose method focused on buying stocks at extremely low prices relative to their intrinsic worth. Buffett hunted for what Graham called cigar butts, businesses that had only a few puffs of value left but were cheap enough to yield profit. Charlie did not disagree that bargains were useful, but he believed this approach was limiting. He proposed something bold. Instead of buying fair companies at wonderful prices, why not buy wonderful companies at fair prices? This was more than a refinement. It was a strategic evolution, one that would redefine modern investing. Buffett later said, "Charlie changed my whole view. It wasn't that I had to unlearn everything. It was just a wonderful switch." Charlie did not just influence Buffett. He transformed him. The partnership emerges. While the two men did not immediately join forces formally, their strategic alignment grew every year. Conversations turned into shared analysis, investments overlapped, ideas merged. Buffett brought emotional tranquility and relentless practicality. Munger brought multidisciplinary thinking and intellectual rigor. Together, they began constructing a philosophy, one based on rational discipline, patience, skepticism, and long-term compounding. Their minds worked differently, but toward the same endpoint. They were not competitors, they were complements, the rarest and most powerful form of collaboration. In time, Charlie would join Berkshire Hathaway as vice chairman, where his influence would quietly, permanently change the company's trajectory. But before Berkshire could become an empire, it first needed to be reshaped. A reshaping that would take vision, restraint, and absolute clarity. Qualities that Charlie Munger possessed in abundance. Foundation of the Munger philosophy. By the early 1960s, Munger had fully developed what would later become one of the most respected personal philosophies in global business thinking. A philosophy built on several core principles. First, rationality above emotion. Human behavior is driven by biases, fear, greed, envy, conformity. Most people act based on impulse. Munger believed that to succeed, one must identify and neutralize these biases. Second, the latticework of mental models. No one field holds the truth. To see reality clearly, one must study mathematics, physics, psychology, biology, economics, and integrate them into a unified understanding. Third, invert. Always invert. Solving a problem is easier when approached from the opposite direction. Instead of asking, "How do I succeed?" ask, "How do I avoid failure?" Avoiding stupidity is more reliable than chasing brilliance. Fourth, patience. Wealth accumulates slowly. Decisions must be few, deliberate, and significant. Munger believed that the greatest advantage in life is the ability to wait longer than others. These principles were not theories, they were tools he used relentlessly. And when combined with Buffett's extraordinary discipline and temperament, they would create one of the most powerful investment engines in history. The stage is set. By the midpoint of the 20th century, the world was entering a new economic era. Industry was expanding. Global markets were emerging. Technology was accelerating. The dynamics of wealth creation were changing. Buffett had found his trusted thinking partner. Munger had found the platform where his clarity could shape outcomes at global scale. Together, they were poised to transform Berkshire Hathaway from a failing textile business into a financial fortress built on simplicity, patience, and deep understanding of human behavior. But the transformation would not be immediate. It would require rejecting the dominant logic of Wall Street, ignoring the noise of speculation, and focusing on principles that seemed almost old-fashioned, yet proved timeless. And as Berkshire grew, Charlie's influence, though often invisible, would become undeniable. The architect had found his blueprint. Part 2. The Architecture of an Empire. The Berkshire Hathaway that the world knows today, a global powerhouse valued in the hundreds of billions, with holdings spanning railroads to insurance, consumer goods to utilities, did not start with grandeur. It began as a failing textile company in New England, a business weakened by time, globalization, and inevitable industrial decline. It was, by many metrics, the last place one would look to find the foundation of a financial empire. When Warren Buffett first purchased Berkshire in the mid-1960s, he was still shaped largely by the teachings of Benjamin Graham, searching for undervalued, overlooked companies whose share prices sat below their true worth. Berkshire on paper was cheap, but the industry was doomed. This is where Charlie Munger's influence became transformative. Charlie recognized something that few investors of the time understood. It is not enough for something to be cheap. It must also be worth owning. The wisdom seems obvious in hindsight, but at the time, this idea was revolutionary, and it was the spark that ignited the reinvention of Berkshire Hathaway. The shift in philosophy. Buffett, competitive and intellectually honest, listened carefully when Munger challenged the cigar butt approach. Charlie argued that buying poor or deteriorating businesses simply because their stock was discounted was a trap. Cheapness alone was not a margin of safety. A business without durable quality was a business without a future. Buffett would later credit Charlie with changing the direction of his investment strategy entirely. And that new strategy can be summarized in a single sentence that would echo through investing history. It's far better to buy a wonderful company at a fair price than a fair company at a wonderful price. Those words marked the beginning of Berkshire's transformation. The hunt was no longer for bargains. The hunt was for greatness. Businesses with strong competitive advantages. Businesses that could grow on their own momentum. Businesses built to endure. This shift required patience, restraint, discipline. It required waiting for rare opportunities and ignoring everything else. Munger once said, "The big money is not in the buying and selling, but in the waiting." And so, they waited. The insurance breakthrough, the float engine. The great breakthrough came not from textiles, but from insurance. An industry Buffett and Munger recognized as holding a unique financial advantage. Insurance operates differently from most businesses. Policyholders pay premiums in advance. Claims, however, are paid later, sometimes years later. The money sitting in between, known as the float, can be invested. This float grows and compounds over time, providing an expanding pool of capital that the company does not have to earn in the traditional sense. If an insurance company is well run, meaning claims are accurately priced and risks are well calculated, the float becomes not a cost, but a source of profit. This was the financial lever that Berkshire needed, an engine of compounding unlike anything else in business. Buffett and Munger acquired National Indemnity, followed by GEICO, among others. Each acquisition expanded the float, and that float fueled further acquisitions. With the insurance engine in place, the empire began to take shape. Berkshire was no longer just a company. It was becoming a capital allocation machine. The Coca-Cola investment, a monument to patience. The 1980s marked one of the most iconic investment decisions in Berkshire history, the acquisition of Coca-Cola. At the time, Coca-Cola was already a global brand, recognized across continents, spoken in dozens of languages. It had presence, loyalty, and enormous distribution power. But to most investors, it seemed too obvious, too well known to offer exceptional returns. Munger disagreed. He recognized the competitive moat. The brand was not just a product, it was a cultural symbol, embedded in global identity. Competitors could copy the taste, but not the meaning. Charlie understood something deeper, that value is not just measured in financial statements, but in psychology, in memory, in identity, in habit. Buffett and Munger invested heavily. The position grew to billions in value, returning many multiples over decades. The Coca-Cola investment demonstrated the power of Munger's philosophy. Strength endures, brands endure, quality endures. A business that grows slowly, predictably, and broadly is far more valuable than a cheap business that is declining. It was not luck, it was clarity. Understanding human bias, Munger's psychology of markets. While Buffett provided emotional steadiness, Munger contributed an equally powerful skill, the ability to recognize and avoid psychological errors. Munger understood that markets are not rational. Markets are human, and humans are predictable in their irrationality. He studied the psychology of persuasion, the psychology of misjudgment, the cognitive biases that lead people to follow crowds, to overvalue the recent past, to fear losses more intensely than they value gains. He did not seek to beat the market by outsmarting its complexity. He sought to avoid the mistakes that others could not help making. He identified more than 20 key psychological tendencies. Among them, social proof, the instinct to follow the crowd. Incentive bias, the mind believes what it is rewarded to believe. Commitment bias, once we commit to a belief, we defend it, even when wrong. Availability bias. The mind overweights information that is easiest to recall. Loss aversion. Losses feel twice as painful as gains feel rewarding. Where others traded emotionally, Charlie observed quietly. Where others reacted, Charlie remained still. Where others lost clarity, Charlie sharpened his focus. This was not simply intelligence, it was discipline of the mind. The culture of Berkshire, built on restraint. As Berkshire expanded, it did something that set it apart from nearly every corporation of similar size. It remained simple. No corporate bureaucracy, no sprawling management layers, no obsession with quarterly performance, no strategic committees for the sake of appearance. Buffett and Munger refused to chase trends. They refused to overpay for acquisitions. They refused to expand for the sake of scale. Their philosophy could be summarized in a single rule: avoid stupidity before seeking brilliance. This principle, inversion, shaped every major decision. Instead of asking, "How can we be successful?" they asked, "How do we avoid failure? Avoid debt, avoid complexity, avoid emotional decision-making, avoid businesses you do not understand." This restraint gave Berkshire something priceless: durability. While other empires rose and collapsed, Berkshire endured. The quiet influence of Charlie Munger. To the outside world, Warren Buffett was the face of Berkshire, the chairman, the public speaker, the shareholder letter author, the folk hero from Omaha. But behind him, always beside him, was Charlie, quiet, analytical, deliberate. Where Buffett charmed, Munger clarified. Where Buffett explained, Munger corrected. Their partnership was not one of teacher and student, but of equals, two minds tuned to the same frequency. Buffett once described their dynamic simply, "Charlie is the architect. I am the general contractor." Charlie designed the intellectual blueprint. Buffett executed it in the real world. This partnership, nearly unmatched in business history, was built not on contracts, nor hierarchy, nor ego. It was built on shared values: honesty, patience, transparency, rationality, long-term thinking. In a world where partnerships fracture under ambition and pride, theirs remained unbroken for more than 60 years. The power of their collaboration lay not in agreement, but in the ability to disagree constructively. Each trusted the other to challenge him, and to do so without ego. This was the foundation of Berkshire's stability. The lessons Munger wanted the world to learn. Charlie did not seek fame, he did not seek followers, he did not seek to be admired, but he did want the world to think better, to behave more rationally, to see clearly. He believed that most human suffering, financial or otherwise, came from the refusal to face reality. He offered lessons, often blunt, often uncomfortable, but always true. Among them, the first rule of compounding is to never interrupt it unnecessarily. Time matters more than speed. Growth comes slowly, quietly, steadily. If you can't be a little wise, at least be less stupid. Reducing error is more reliable than chasing brilliance. Show me the incentive, and I'll show you the outcome. Human behavior is shaped by reward, not intention. The best thing a human being can do is to help another human being know more. Knowledge grows when shared. These were not slogans. They were operating principles, practical tools for navigating life. The empire strengthens. By the late 20th century, Berkshire Hathaway had become a collection of some of the strongest brands in the world. GEICO Coca-Cola, American Express, See's Candies, the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway. Each company reflected a core truth. Strength is found in simplicity. No speculative technology bets, no fragile leverage, no rushing into the future with blind optimism. Instead, patience, analysis, understanding. Munger often reminded audiences, there are no old, bold investors. Survival, endurance, and clarity were the victory. The world watched Berkshire grow, slowly, steadily, powerfully, while empires built on excitement collapsed around it. The architecture held. The man behind the philosophy. Despite wealth that could have afforded extravagance, Charlie lived quietly. He did not surround himself with luxury or display. His fulfillment came not from possessions, but from understanding and curiosity. He read constantly: history, science, psychology, mathematics, biography. He once said he never knew anyone who was wise and did not read every day. Charlie understood that the mind must be fed, or it will decay. His curiosity did not fade with age. If anything, it sharpened. He saw the world not as a place to conquer, but a place to comprehend. And that comprehension became his legacy. The empire's hidden strength. By the turn of the 21st century, Berkshire Hathaway was no longer simply a corporation. It was a living demonstration of what rational thought can build when uncorrupted by ego, haste, or illusion. Munger's role was not always visible to the public, but to those who knew, his influence was unmistakable. He was the compass, the steadying force, the silent architect. And yet, the world was changing. New technologies were rising, markets were accelerating, investment culture was shifting toward speed, speculation, and short-term gains. The question was no longer, how did Berkshire get here? The question became, could Berkshire's philosophy endure in a world that no longer valued patience? That question would define the next chapter of the story. And Charlie Munger, even in the final decades of his life, would answer it with unwavering clarity. Part 3. The final lesson. A life of clarity. By the early 21st century, the world of finance had accelerated beyond recognition. Trading floors buzzed with algorithms instead of human judgment. Investment decisions were made in milliseconds, not years. The culture of wealth shifted toward speculation, the pursuit of speed, excitement, and immediate gratification. But inside Berkshire Hathaway, time still moved slowly. The company did not chase trends. It did not adopt urgency that was not needed. It did not confuse movement with progress. The world watched and wondered how a corporation built on patience and restraint could survive in an age defined by haste. But the answer had already been given decades earlier. Principles do not age. And Charlie Munger, now in the later chapter of his life, remained the guardian of those principles. The quiet classroom. Munger as teacher. Charlie never set out to become a public philosopher. He did not seek to be quoted, admired, or followed. Yet gradually, a global audience began to gather around him. Investors, business owners, academics, scientists, engineers, people drawn not by personality, but by clarity. Every year, thousands traveled to Omaha and Pasadena to hear him speak. Not for entertainment, not for inspiration, but for truth. His lectures were not dramatic. They were not fiery. They were calm, precise, and direct. He did not flatter the audience. He did not encourage dreams of quick wealth. Instead, he reminded them of something most wanted to ignore. Success requires discipline, not genius, not luck, discipline. He spoke of the latticework of mental models, the idea that wisdom comes not from one field of knowledge, but from the combination of many. He encouraged people to read widely, to question assumptions, to accept when they were wrong, and to avoid the traps of human bias. In an era of short attention spans, Munger stood as a monument to depth. He was proof that the mind, when cultivated, can remain sharp long past the age others begin to fade. The investor who ignored the noise. As technology companies began to dominate the global economy, Apple, Amazon, Google, Meta, many expected Munger to resist them entirely. He had long warned against investing in businesses one cannot understand. But Munger did not oppose technology. He opposed unclear thinking. When Apple became not merely a tech company, but an ecosystem, a closed, sticky, integrated network of devices and identity, Munger recognized the moat. Under his influence, Berkshire Hathaway made one of the largest investments in its history. The value grew into the hundreds of billions. Munger had not changed his philosophy. Technology simply grew into it. His rule had always been the same. Understand what you own. Understand why you own it. And never be swayed by the crowd. While others chased every new innovation, Charlie remained unmoved. While markets panicked, Charlie waited. While investors traded, Charlie observed. He understood that in the long run, reality always wins. Not stories, not excitement, not illusions. Reality. The digital speculation era and Munger's warning. As cryptocurrencies and speculative technology markets surged, a younger generation celebrated risk-taking. Gambling disguised itself as investment. Volatility became entertainment. Charlie did not condemn ambition. He condemned self-deception. He warned, speculation is a form of gambling, and the house always wins. To those who believed wealth could be earned instantly, he offered a blunt truth. Easy money breeds careless thinking. He did not speak these words to discourage. He spoke them because he understood something history has proven repeatedly. What rises quickly without foundation collapses with equal speed. Munger taught that stability, clarity, and patience may feel slow, but they are the only strategies that endure. In time, markets validated his warnings. Overheated valuations cracked. Speculative bubbles burst. Investors who had celebrated their own brilliance were left with losses and confusion. But Berkshire endured, not because it was stronger, but because it was disciplined. The private man behind the public mind. For all the philosophy and wisdom, the core of Munger's life was not business. It was family. It was loyalty. It was curiosity. It was resilience. He remarried and raised a large blended family, 8 children in total. He built a home not of luxury and display, but of learning. Books lined walls, ideas filled rooms. Conversations were thoughtful, not theatrical. He played cards. He laughed often. He enjoyed friendship and simplicity. Yet the memory of loss, his son Teddy, remained within him, not as grief that consumed, but as love that reshaped perspective. Munger believed that life is not defined by what happens to us, but by how we respond. Adversity was not an enemy. It was a teacher, and he had learned well. The final chapter at Berkshire. As the years passed, the world came to recognize what insiders had always known. Charlie Munger was not the sidekick, not the advisor, not the supporting figure. He was half of the foundation. Buffett himself said it plainly. Berkshire Hathaway could not have been built without Charlie Munger. Together, they built something few corporations have ever achieved. A company that could thrive without sacrificing integrity. A business empire that did not require corruption, deceit, or compromise. A place where honesty and logic were more valuable than ambition or charisma. This was Charlie Munger's architecture, invisible to the eye, unmistakable in its strength. The final lessons. In his last public years, Munger distilled a lifetime of clarity into a handful of timeless principles. 1. Take responsibility for your thoughts. Your mind is your only true asset. 2. Avoid envy. Envy is the one sin that brings no joy. 3. Live below your means. Independence is the goal, not appearance. 4. Be reliable. Trust compounds faster than money. 5. Keep learning. The world changes. Intelligence must adapt. He believed that life is not about brilliance or talent. It is about character. And character is formed in silence, in the decisions no one sees. The passing of a monument. Charlie Munger passed away on November 28, 2023, just weeks before his 100th birthday. He left behind no empire in his own name, no brand built around his identity, no monuments carved in stone, What he left was far greater. He left a way of thinking, a method for making choices, a framework for clarity, a toolkit for surviving life's unpredictability. His legacy is not simply Berkshire Hathaway. It is every person who learned to see more clearly because of him. He proved that deep intelligence does not require complexity. That wisdom is quiet. That wealth is a side effect of understanding, not the goal of it. Charlie Munger's true achievement was not financial, it was mental freedom. The ability to see the world as it is, not as we wish it to be, not as fear suggests, not as crowds insist, but as it is. And that clarity is his gift to the world. Charlie Munger once said, "Take a simple idea and take it seriously." His idea was simple: think clearly. But to take it seriously, to apply it with discipline through crisis, temptation, loss, and triumph, that is what made him extraordinary. His life is a reminder that greatness does not always come from being seen. Sometimes the greatest builders stand behind the structure, not in front of it. Berkshire Hathaway stands today as a monument not only to financial success, but to the power of rational thought. And as long as patience has value, as long as discipline can triumph over impulse, as long as wisdom can outlast noise, Charlie Munger will never fade. His architecture remains,